A frozen mare and her foal begged to be let inside. When the door swung open, everyone was stunned. Could you imagine that a normal knock on the door could forever divide your life into before and after? Not a human knock. Not the knock of a lost traveler. Something completely different. Something desperate. That night, the blizzard howled as if it wanted to devour the entire village of Sukhodolye, lost in the snow. The wind threw handfuls of stinging snow against the windows, and the old fir trees groaned under its onslaught. Anna Vetrova, a 38-year-old woman with a shadow of eternal fatigue in her gray eyes, was already used to such nights. They were her allies. In such weather, no one would come. No one would disturb her voluntary seclusion in her father's house on the very edge of the village. She worked at the post office, sorting letters and parcels, other people's joys and sorrows. But she had long since locked her own soul away, and she threw away the key. But that night, there was a knock at her door. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's begin. At first, it was a dull, heavy knock. Then another. Anna froze with a cup of tea in her hand. Her father, Sergei Ivanovich, a former gamekeeper, a man who looked as if he had been carved from an old oak tree, looked up from his book, his thick gray eyebrows knitted together on his forehead. The blows repeated. But now there was another sound, a plaintive, scraping, desperate sound. It couldn't be a human being. Sergei Ivanovich stood up silently, his stocky figure radiating neither fear nor surprise, only concentration. He went to the door and listened. Anna also approached, her heart pounding with an anxiety she hadn't felt in many years. Through the howling wind, she heard a quiet, plaintive neigh. And at that moment, her world collapsed. The memory she had buried for years under a thick layer of indifference exploded into icy shards. The smell of wet horsehair, the crackling of ice, her husband's desperate cry. She recoiled from the door as if from a fire. "Don't open it," she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by a new gust of blizzard. Sergei Ivanovich looked at her with a piercing gaze that mixed pain and determination. He said nothing. He simply turned the heavy iron bolt. The door flew open, and a cloud of frosty steam and snow dust rushed into the house. When it cleared, everyone inside froze. A large bay mare stood in the doorway. Her coat was covered with a crust of ice and frost, her long eyelashes were frozen, and steam escaped from her nostrils. She was breathing heavily, leaning on 3 legs, the 4th unnaturally tucked under her. But the most frightening thing was in her eyes. They were huge, dark, and filled with unbearable supplication. She looked straight at Anna, and that look said it all: pain, fear, and a desperate plea for help. Behind her, hiding from the wind, a small foal trembled, just as frozen and frightened. He was barely taller than his mother's knee. The mare took a step forward, into the warmth of the house, and collapsed heavily on the threshold, with a quiet moan. The foal squealed in fear and poked its muzzle into her icy side. Anna stood rooted to the spot. Before her eyes was not just a frozen horse. Before her was her past. That very day, that very river, that very crack of ice. Her husband, Dmitri, had also tried to save a horse that had fallen through the ice, and he drowned with it. Since then, Anna had hated and feared horses. They were a symbol of death to her. But now, looking at this exhausted creature and its trembling foal, she felt the icy crust around her heart begin to crack. Sergei Ivanovich acted without hesitation. "Anya, don't stand there. Get the old blankets from the closet, quick!" His voice, usually quiet, sounded like a command. This order snapped her out of her stupor. She rushed to the closet, while her father was already trying to help the mare get up. But she just shook her head. He was a strong man, but he couldn't lift half a ton of living weight on his own. "Come on, daughter, help!" he shouted. Anna ran up, closing her eyes so she wouldn't have to look too closely at those eyes, and grabbed the icy mane. The smell of wet wool hit her nose, causing a wave of nausea and dizziness. But her father's voice brought her back to her senses. "Pull! 1, 2, got it!" With a joint effort, they managed to drag the mare into the spacious porch that had once served as a workshop. The foal trotted after them, not straying a step from its mother. Closing the door, they found themselves in relative silence, broken only by the mare's heavy breathing and the howling wind outside. Sergei Ivanovich turned on an old heater, and soon the room was filled with welcome warmth. He began to rub the horse with a straw bundle, knocking the ice off. "Anya, you're a veterinarian," he said without looking at her. "I know this is hard for you, but no one else can help her. Take a look at her." Anna slowly approached. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't touched an animal as a doctor in 5 years. She had been running from it for 5 years. But now, in front of her, was a living creature that was dying. She forced herself to take a deep breath. She put on her father's old sheepskin coat and knelt down next to the mare. Her fingers, obeying muscle memory, began their work. She checked her breathing and felt for a pulse in her carotid artery. It was too weak and irregular. Her body temperature was critically low. Her gaze fell on her bent leg. What she saw made her feel even colder than the frost. There was a torn wound on the leg, just above the hoof. But that wasn't the strangest thing. The wound wasn't from a fall. It was too smooth, as if made by a sharp object. And next to it, on the hide, there was a brand. Not a factory brand with numbers and symbols, but a crude, homemade one, burned hastily. 3 intertwined letters that Anna had never seen before. She looked up at her father. He was also looking at the brand, and his face had become hard as stone. "These aren't just stray horses," he said quietly. "Not just lost." At that moment, the mare whinnied again, and her body shook. Anna realized that they had very little time, and that this night, which had brought 2 uninvited guests to her home, was only the beginning of something much more frightening and complicated. Morning brought with it a fragile calm. The blizzard died down, leaving behind giant snowdrifts and a dazzling white sun. The village of Sukhodolya, cut off from the world, began to wake up. The first to break the morning silence at the Vetrov's house was the village elder, Semyon Petrovich. His UAZ, the only vehicle in the village capable of breaking through such drifts, roared laboriously as it pulled up to the gate. Semyon, a burly man with a face red from the cold, tumbled out of the car and headed for the house. He already knew everything. News spread faster than the wind in the village. "Sergei Ivanovich, Anna, open up. What's the emergency?" he bellowed from the porch. Sergei Ivanovich came out to meet him, buttoning his sheepskin coat. "Quiet," he said. "The horse is heavy. You'll scare it." Semyon unceremoniously peered into the porch. Seeing the mare lying on the straw and the foal huddling against her, he whistled. His small eyes darted around, assessing the situation. "Wow, she looks like a thoroughbred." "Where did they come from?" he asked, addressing himself rather than the owners of the house. "They came," Sergei Ivanovich replied curtly. "They came," Semyon echoed. "Horses don't just wander off in a blizzard. They must have escaped from the neighboring stud farm. I already called them. They promised a reward if we find them. We should report it properly and register the find." Anna, who had followed her father out, listened to him with growing irritation. She had not left the mare's side all night. She had managed to dress the wound, make a warming compress, and give the animal some warm broth to drink. The foal, emboldened, even drank some milk from a bowl. But the mare's condition remained serious. She looked at Semyon, at his well-fed, pragmatic face, and saw in him everything she had fled from: vanity, greed, indifference. "They're not from the stud farm," she said quietly but firmly. Semyon stared at her. "Why is that? Are you an expert now?" "She has a strange mark on her leg," Sergei Ivanovich interjected. "It's from a pistol, and the wound isn't from a fall. They were either being chased or something worse." Semyon's face lengthened. The prospect of getting involved in something criminal did not please him at all. "Okay, Ivanovich, don't get me worked up. We don't have any criminals here. The animals got lost, that's all. As the head of the village, I have to keep order. I'll write up a report, and that's that." But Sergei Ivanovich was no longer listening to him. He was putting on his hunting skis. "Where are you going?" Semyon asked, alarmed. "I'm going to follow the tracks," replied the old gamekeeper, checking his bindings. "I want to see where they came from." "I forbid it," the headman exclaimed. "You'll get snowed in and freeze to death, and there's nothing for you to do there. This is a matter for the authorities." "The only authority here right now is the blizzard," Sergei Ivanovich replied curtly. "And I know every tree in this forest." He took his rifle from the wall and walked out the door. Anna watched him go with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Sergei Ivanovich had been walking for over an hour. The tracks left by the horses were barely visible under the fresh snow. But to an experienced tracker, they were like an open book. He could see how the mare had stumbled, how she had rested, how the foal had huddled against her, seeking protection. It was strange that the tracks did not lead from the road or the neighboring village, but directly from the river. The Sukonka River froze over in winter, but the current was strong, and ice holes could form anywhere. Approaching the bank, he froze. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The snow at the edge of the bank was heavily trampled. Not only were there horse hoof prints, but also at least 2 pairs of men's boots. And right at the water's edge, the ice was broken. A huge black hole gaped in the middle of the white silence. A thick broken branch lay nearby, and the snow was trampled as if someone had been fighting there. He crouched down and noticed something else. A small, dark object was frozen into the ice. He carefully picked it out with his knife. It was an expensive leather car key ring, clearly not belonging to the locals. Sergei Ivanovich looked at the tracks leading from the hole toward his house. Only the tracks of a mare and a foal. Human footprints ended at the water's edge. Someone had tried to drown these animals, and perhaps someone had succeeded. He put the key ring in his pocket and quickly went back. Now it wasn't just about saving animals. It was an investigation. While her father was away, Anna was left alone with her fears and new responsibilities. She examined the mare again. The temperature wasn't going down. The wound on her leg looked bad. Anna knew that without antibiotics, it could become infected. The nearest veterinary pharmacy was in the district center, which was impossible to reach on the unpaved road. She felt helpless. Rumors began to spread in the village. Semyon's wife, a talkative and envious woman, had already told everyone that the Vetrobs had pocketed the thoroughbred horses and were now waiting for the profits. Some sympathized, some condemned. For Anna, it was unbearable. She was used to being invisible, and now she was the center of attention. It was getting dark. Her father still hadn't returned. Anxiety gripped her heart. She went out onto the porch and peered into the darkening forest. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement near the old abandoned barn on the neighboring property. A figure darted around the corner, but Anna managed to notice that he was not dressed like a villager. He was wearing a city jacket and thin pants. Who could it be? A lost tourist? Unlikely. Her heart pounded. She quickly went into the house and locked the door. In Suchodolye, doors were never locked. But today, everything was different. The world that had seemed like a safe prison suddenly showed its teeth, and she realized that danger was much closer than it seemed. When Sergei Ivanovich returned, he was gloomier than a cloud. He silently showed Anna the keychain he had found. "They wanted to drown them," he said. "There are traces of a struggle by the wormwood. 2 men and horses." Anna gasped. Her story about the strange figure by the barn had only reinforced his suspicions. One of them must have survived, and he's somewhere here in the village, hiding. Night fell again on Suchodolye, but now it did not seem like salvation. It was full of threats. Her father loaded his rifle and placed it by the bed. No one was going to sleep. Closer to midnight, the mare's condition deteriorated sharply. She began to breathe heavily and hoarsely, her body shaking with convulsions. Anna realized that this was agony. "That's it, Dad," she whispered, and the tears she had not shed since her husband's funeral poured from her eyes. "I can't save her. I have nothing." Sergei Ivanovich placed his heavy hand on her shoulder. "You did everything you could." He left the porch, leaving her alone with the dying animal. Anna stroked the mare's hot neck, whispering words of comfort, and hated herself for her helplessness. At that moment, she cursed her cowardice, her fear, her broken life. And at that very moment, she heard the door to the house creak. But it wasn't her father. Then there was a crash, her father's cry, and a man burst into the hallway where she was standing. It was the stranger. He was exhausted, his eyes wild, his lip broken. He was clutching a heavy wrench in his hand. "Where are the horses?" he croaked, shifting his wild gaze from Anna to the mare. "They're mine. I won't give them up." The man who had burst into the house was on the verge of hysteria. His eyes darted wildly, filled with animal terror. The wrench in his hand trembled. Anna instinctively stepped forward, shielding the dying mare's head with her body. At that moment, all her years of fear of horses evaporated, replaced by a fierce, primal instinct to protect. "Go away," she gasped, her voice sounding metallic in a way she didn't expect. "You're going to kill her." The stranger didn't seem to hear her. He stared at the mare, his gaze a mixture of despair and some kind of mad tenderness. "Zarya," he whispered. "My Zarya." At that moment, Sergei Ivanovich came out of the house. There was a fresh graze on his cheekbone, but he calmly held his old double-barreled shotgun in his hands. He wasn't aiming. He was just holding it, and that alone was enough to make the air in the room thick and heavy. "Put that piece of junk on the floor," the gamekeeper said in an even voice. "Then we'll talk." The stranger slowly shifted his gaze to the gun, then to Sergei Ivanovich's stern face. His shoulders slumped. He was like a hunted animal with no strength left to fight. The key fell with a dull thud onto the dirt floor. At that moment, the mare he had named Zarya let out a long, hoarse moan, and her body arched in a new convulsion. The sound affected everyone. It was more terrifying than any scream or gunshot. It was the sound of life slipping away. The stranger collapsed to his knees. "She's dying. Because of me," he muttered, covering his face with his hands. Anna, forgetting about the gun and the danger, bent over the horse again. "Dad, water, and all the towels you have," she commanded. Her professional instincts took over completely. Now it was not just a symbol of her past, but a patient. Heavy, almost hopeless, but her patient. Sergei Ivanovich, without taking his eyes off the stranger, nodded and went into the house. Anna soaked rags in warm water and wiped Zari's hot forehead, trying to bring down the fever. "Quiet, my dear, quiet," she whispered. And the horse seemed to listen for a moment, its breathing becoming a little more even. The stranger raised his head. "My name is Igor," he said in a hoarse voice. "I didn't want to. They made me." Sergei Ivanovich returned with a basin of water and a stack of old towels. He placed them next to his daughter and crouched down in front of Igor. "Who are they?" he asked quietly, but the whisper sent a chill down Anna's spine. Igor shuddered. "People. I owe them. They're involved in smuggling. Stolen horses." Anna froze. So her father was right. This was a crime. "Zarya is no ordinary horse," Igor continued, looking at the mare adoringly. "She's a champion. She was stolen from an elite stud farm, and her foal is from a famous stallion. They're worth a fortune. I was supposed to drive them across this river where a car was waiting. But my partners decided they didn't need me anymore, that they wanted all the money for themselves. They wanted to drown me and the horses. So there would be no trace." He touched his broken lip. "I managed to fight them off. I saw Zarya make it to the other side. I went after her, and then I saw the light in your window." His story was disjointed, but there was truth in his eyes. The truth of despair and fear. Anna listened to him, and only one thought raced through her mind. Antibiotics. "I need antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, urgently." "We have something in the first aid kit," she said, turning to her father. "But those are human medicines. It's difficult to calculate the dosage, and there's no guarantee they'll work. We need veterinary medicine, urgently." Sergei Ivanovich frowned. "We can't get to the district center. The road is so snowed in that it'll be impossible to get through even in 2 days." Suddenly, it became quiet in the hallway. All three of them, Anna, her father, and Igor, stared at the mare, whose breathing had become labored and weak again. It seemed as if she was dying before their eyes. "There was one way," Sergei Ivanovich said slowly, as if thinking aloud. "The old collective farm warehouse, a veterinary clinic. It's been abandoned for 10 years, but it's brick and the roof is strong. Maybe there's something left there. It's a 1 in 1,000 chance." "Where is it?" Igor immediately perked up. "I'll go." "You can't take 2 steps in your condition," the gamekeeper snapped. "And you don't know these places. It's 3 kilometers across the fields." "I know where it is," Igor exclaimed. "I saw it on my way here, a big brick building near the old sawmill." Sergei Ivanovich's eyes narrowed. "Right, come with me. Show me the shortest way, if there is one." The plan was crazy. To walk at night, in the freezing cold, through a snow-covered forest to an abandoned warehouse in search of medicine that was most likely long past its expiration date. But it was their only chance. While the men were getting ready, Semyon's UAZ drove up to the house again. It turned out that one of the neighbors had heard the screams and called him. Semyon entered the house looking like a man dispensing justice, but when he saw the grim Sergei Ivanovich with his rifle, the beaten stranger, and Anna bent over the dying horse, he lost all his arrogance. "What? What's going on here? He stammered. None of your business, Semyon, replied Sergei Ivanovich, pulling on his ski boots. How is it none of my business? I'm the authority here. There's a stranger here, possibly a criminal. I have to call the police. Go ahead, if the phone line is working. The gamekeeper sneered. He knew there was no connection. Until then, don't get in the way. We're saving a life here. Not a human one, though. So you probably don't care. Semyon turned red with anger and helplessness. He looked at Igor, then at Anna. Do you even understand what you're getting yourselves into? This is a criminal offense, harboring a fugitive. Go, Semyon, Anna said quietly, without taking her eyes off Zari. And there was so much cold fury in her voice that the village head backed away. He muttered something about not letting this go and rushed out the door. A minute later, his UAZ drove away, snorting angrily. Ready? Asked Sergei Ivanovich, slinging a backpack with flashlights and a thermos over his shoulder. Igor, whose wounds Anna had hastily dressed, nodded decisively. Anya. Her father approached her. We'll try to be quick. Hold on. Lock all the bolts. And if anyone tries to break in... He glanced meaningfully at the rifle he had left leaning against the wall by the entrance. I understand. She nodded. Her heart ached with fear for him. But she knew there was no other way out. The men stepped out into the icy night, which rang with the sound of frost. The moon bathed the snow-covered forest in a ghostly light. Anna closed the heavy door behind them, turned the key in the lock, and then lowered the massive bolt. She was alone against death, which was trying to take her patient away. Alone in a house that was no longer her fortress, but had become a besieged fort. She listened. Silence, only Zari's heavy breathing and the quiet snoring of the foal, who had fallen asleep curled up next to his mother. And in that silence, she suddenly heard a new sound, distant but distinct, a low, rumbling hum of an engine. It wasn't Semyon's UAZ. This sound was more powerful, heavier. It was as if a large SUV or truck was slowly but surely making its way along the snow-covered road toward their village, toward her house. Anna rushed to the window. In the distance, at the entrance to Sukhodolye, she saw two bright beams of headlights cutting through the night. They were getting closer. The headlights were relentless. They crawled across the snow, devouring the darkness, and with every second they grew closer and brighter. Anna's heart pounded in her throat, muffled like a drum. It was them, Igor's pursuers. She didn't doubt it for a moment. No one from the village drove cars like these, and no one would venture out into a blizzard in the middle of the night in their remote neighborhood. A wave of panic washed over her, but it quickly subsided, replaced by a cold, ringing determination. She was no longer the recluse who hid from the world. There were two defenseless creatures in her house, and her father was out there somewhere in the forest, and she had to buy him some time. Anna rushed into the house and grabbed her father's heavy rifle leaning against the wall. It was cold and unfamiliar in her hands, but its weight gave her confidence. She checked as her father had taught her many years ago. The cartridges were in the barrels. Yes. She turned off the lights in the hallway and in the house, leaving only a dim nightlight in the corridor. Then she rushed to the window overlooking the road. A huge black SUV, resembling an armored vehicle, slowly drove into the yard and stopped. The engine was not turned off. Its low rumble vibrated in the frosty air, pressing on her ears. The doors opened, and two men got out of the car, tall and dressed in dark clothes, Their faces were hidden in the shadows of their hoods. They were in no hurry. One took out a powerful flashlight and began methodically scanning the house, the windows, and the roof. The second just stood there with his arms crossed over his chest, as if assessing the strength of the building. Anna stepped away from the window and pressed herself against the wall. Her breathing quickened. They knew the horses were here. Igor had led them here. She glanced into the porch. Zarya lay almost motionless, only her sides rising heavily. The foal, awakened by the noise, stood up fearfully on its thin legs and pressed itself against its mother. Anna bit her lip until it bled. She would not let them in. She would shoot. Let it be foolish. Let it be hopeless. But she would defend her home. Meanwhile, Sergei Ivanovich and Igor made their way through the night forest. They skied, following each other's tracks. The moon shone brightly, turning the forest into a black and white, ghostly world. The frost was getting stronger, and it was difficult to breathe. Igor, weakened and exhausted, could barely keep up with the old hunter, who moved through the deep snow with the confidence of a master. "Keep up," Sergei Ivanovich called over his shoulder. "If you freeze, no one will carry you." They walked in silence for 20 minutes, hearing only the crunch of snow and their own breathing. Finally, when they came out onto a small clearing, Igor couldn't hold back any longer. "Sergei Ivanovich," he began, gasping for breath. "I have to tell you about Dima." The gamekeeper stopped and slowly turned around. In the moonlight, his face looked like a stone mask. "What about him?" he asked hoarsely. "That day, when he drowned, we were together," Igor blurted out. "We had a fight, a really bad one. It was about the horses. It was the last straw. Dima wanted to quit. He said he was tired of being afraid, that he had Anya and wanted a normal life, and I talked him into doing one last job. I convinced him it was big money, that we'd solve all our problems and start over. He didn't want to. I made him." Sergei Ivanovich stared at him for a long time, without blinking. There was no surprise or anger in his eyes, only a bottomless, burning anguish. "I know," he said finally. "Dima called me an hour before he died. He said he was going to the river. He said he wanted to tell you everything and break away from this. He wasn't going on a job. He was going to save you, you fool, from yourself." These words hit Igor harder than any punch. He staggered and leaned against the trunk of a pine tree. So that's why Dmitri was there. Not for the money. He wanted to get his friend out. And he died. The guilt that Igor had suppressed for years overwhelmed him. He slid down the trunk into a snowdrift. "I ruined everything. I ruined his life. And Anna's. Now you can at least fix something," Sergei Ivanovich said harshly, holding out his hand. "Get up. We don't have much time." He helped Igor to his feet, and they continued on. But now, there was something more between them than just a forced partnership. There was a bitter truth. Ahead, beyond the crest of the hill, the dark silhouette of an abandoned sawmill appeared, and next to it, a squat brick warehouse. They reached the place in 15 minutes. The warehouse looked sinister. The windows were boarded up, and the huge iron gates were covered with rust and frozen solid into the ground. "Here," Sergei Ivanovich whispered, pointing to a small side door. The lock, old and rusty, would not budge. Sergei Ivanovich took a small crowbar out of his backpack. A few sharp, precise blows, and the lock gave way with a screech. Inside, it smelled of dust, decay, and old medicines. The faint beam of the flashlight picked out overturned shelves, broken glass jars on the floor, and cobwebs in the corners. "Look for a metal cabinet," said the gamekeeper, Things like that should be kept in there. They split up. Igor scanned one wall with the beam, Sergei Ivanovich the other. Time was running out. Every minute of delay could be Zari's last. Finally, in the far corner, behind a pile of old sacks, Igor found it. A large fireproof cabinet, like the ones that used to stand in every institution. And of course, it was locked. "Stand back," Sergei Ivanovich commanded. He took up the crowbar again. It was more difficult than the door lock. The metal groaned and bent. Finally, with a deafening screech, the door gave way. Inside, covered with a thick layer of dust, were neat rows of boxes, bottles, and ampules. It looked like a treasure trove. Sergei Ivanovich shone his flashlight, and Igor, whose hands were shaking with excitement, began to sort through the packages. Penicillin, expired. Streptomycin, expired 5 years ago, he muttered. Despair began to creep in again. Was it all for nothing? And then he saw it. A large cardboard box with an inscription that had hardly faded. Broad-spectrum veterinary antibiotic. The expiration date was only 6 months away. Inside, in special compartments, lay 10 untouched glass vials. "I've got it," he whispered. "I found it. Here it is." Sergei Ivanovich shone a light on the vial. The liquid inside was clear, with no sediment. This was their chance. He quickly grabbed the box and stuffed it into his backpack, grabbing several packages of sterile syringes. "Let's go, quick!" They rushed out of the warehouse, and then they froze. From the direction they had come, from the village, they heard the distinct sound of a car engine. It was very close, and it wasn't alone. It sounded like there were 2 cars. They understood everything without words. Those who had come for the horses split up. 2 stayed at the house, while the others, having discovered their tracks, went to intercept them. They were trapped between the house where Anna was alone and their pursuers, who were already blocking their way back. Meanwhile, at the Vetrov's house, one of the strangers, the larger one, slowly walked toward the porch. Anna, watching him through a crack in the curtain, raised her rifle, resting the butt against her shoulder. Her finger rested on the cold trigger. The man did not try to break down the door. He approached the small, frozen window of the workshop and turned on his lantern. A bright, merciless beam struck through the cloudy glass, snatching Zarya, lying on the straw, and the frightened foal out of the darkness. The man just stood there, watching, illuminating his prey. He was showing Anna that he knew everything, that they had come for them. It was a silent, cruel demonstration of power. Aiming at the dark silhouette, Anna realized that firing would only give her away and possibly provoke an immediate assault. Her hands were shaking. And at that most tense moment, when it seemed that the silence was about to explode with a shot, the phone rang loudly in the house. The old dial phone, which had been silent for several days due to a broken line, suddenly screamed piercingly, shattering the night's silence. Anna shuddered at the surprise. The ring repeated, again and again. They didn't break down the door. They didn't shoot. They just called her, knowing she was inside, knowing she was panicking. And that call was scarier than any threat. The phone call in the dead silence was like a whip crack. Piercing, insistent, it drilled into her brain, destroying what little self-control she had left. Anna froze, not lowering her rifle. Who could it be? Had the connection been restored? But why now? The man at the window also flinched at the surprise and turned off the flashlight. The courtyard was plunged back into darkness, broken only by the rumble of an engine. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. The 10th ring, the 11th. It was torture. The plan was simple. Make her give herself away, make her nervous, make her make a mistake. Anna slowly, half crouching, moved away from the window and crept into the room where the phone was. She stared at it as if it were a rattlesnake. Should she pick it up? What would she say? Keep quiet. But the ringing could wake the whole village, even if that was unlikely. Suddenly, the ringing stopped. There was silence, even more terrifying than the ringing itself. Anna held her breath. And then her cell phone, which she always carried with her, vibrated and displayed an unfamiliar number. Her heart sank. They knew her number. They knew everything. She dismissed the call. The phone rang again immediately. At that moment, she understood their game. They weren't going to break into the house and start a fight. That would be too noisy and attract unnecessary attention, even in such a remote place. They wanted to wear her down, to intimidate her, break her psychologically, and force her to open the door herself. Anna looked at the gun in her hands. Shooting people was one thing, but enduring this slow, suffocating siege was something else entirely. She looked out the window again. The figures by the car were talking and gesturing. Then one of them got into the car, and the SUV turned around and slowly drove away, toward the exit of the village. The second man remained. He just stood at the gate, a dark, motionless silhouette. A watcher. Anna realized it was a trap. They wanted her to relax, to think that part of the threat had passed. But the real trap was just closing. The car didn't leave just like that. It drove toward her own people, those who were pursuing her father and Igor. They were going to take them in a pincer movement. And the remaining guard was supposed to make sure she didn't leave the house and couldn't warn anyone. Sergei Ivanovich and Igor, hearing the sound of approaching cars, reacted instantly. The old gamekeeper was in his element. "Follow me, quick!" he hissed, turning off the path and diving into the thick spruce forest. They broke through the thorny branches and lay down in a deep snowdrift behind a fallen tree. A minute later, 2 black SUVs, exactly like the one that had been parked outside Anna's house, drove into the clearing where they had just been. They stopped. 4 men got out of the cars. "Skid marks," a sharp voice rang out. "They went into the forest. There are 2 of them. One is an old man, the other looks like our fugitive." One of them shone a powerful flashlight toward the pine trees where the fugitives were hiding. The beam passed a couple of meters away from them. Igor pressed his head into the snow, barely breathing. "Surround them," commanded the same voice. "They won't get far. We'll catch them while they're still warm." The men spread out and began combing the forest. Sergei Ivanovich nudged Igor in the side and gestured for him to crawl away. They crawled like scouts, trying not to crack a single twig, and began to move deeper into the thicket. The gamekeeper moved silently, like a lynx. He knew every hollow and every ravine here. He led Igor not back to the village, but to the side, toward an old peat bog that froze over in winter, but was dotted with treacherous windows of unfrozen quicksand. It was a dangerous place, but the pursuers, unfamiliar with the area, were unlikely to venture there at night. They crawled and walked, bent over double, for almost an hour. The cries and lights of their pursuers remained behind them. Finally, exhausted, they stopped at the edge of the swamp. "Now listen to me carefully," Sergei Ivanovich whispered breathlessly, taking the precious box of medicine out of his backpack. "Here, you go along the edge of the swamp. There's an old hunting trail. It will take you to the village on the other side, across the ravine. No one will be waiting for you there. Get home and give this to Anna. Tell her how to inject it. The instructions are inside. And lock yourself in. Don't open the door to anyone, no matter what happens." "What about you?" asked Igor. "Where are you going?" "I'll distract them," smiled the gamekeeper, his eyes flashing coldly in the moonlight. "I'll retrace my steps and then lead them in the other direction. Let them chase me through the windbreaks. I know this forest better than they know their own pockets. You go. You have a duty now, to Dima and to his wife." He thrust the box into Igor's hands, slapped him on the shoulder, and without another word, disappeared into the shadows. Igor was left alone, with the box, which was his only hope for salvation, and with a heavy burden of responsibility on his shoulders. He looked toward the village, then at the dark, hostile forest, and for the first time in his life, he made a truly adult, difficult decision. He left. Anna sat in the dark room, listening to every sound. The guard at the gate did not move. An hour passed, then another. She did not know what was happening in the forest, whether her father and Igor were alive. The uncertainty was driving her mad. She approached Zara. The mare was still breathing heavily. Anna put her ear to her chest. Her heart was beating weakly, irregularly. "Hold on, girl, hold on," she whispered. "They'll be here soon. They'll bring medicine." She said this to the horse, but in reality she was convincing herself. Suddenly she heard a soft, scraping sound. Not at the door. It was coming from the other side of the house, where there was a small window in the storeroom. Her heart stopped. The guard at the gate was a diversion. Someone was trying to get into the house from the back. Anna grabbed the rifle and tiptoed toward the storeroom. She pressed herself against the wall by the door, raising the barrels to the level of the entrance. The scraping sound repeated. Then there was a soft crack. Someone was breaking the glass. She held her breath, her finger tense on the trigger. A dark figure would appear in the doorway, and she would shoot. She was ready. The closet door creaked softly and opened slightly. Anna closed her eyes, preparing to pull the trigger. "Anya, it's me," came a tortured whisper from the darkness. She opened her eyes. Standing in the doorway, covered in snow with a scratch across his cheek, was Igor. He could barely stand. He had a backpack in one hand and a box in the other. "Medicine," he gasped. "Your father. He's taking them away." He took a step and collapsed to the floor, losing consciousness. Anna rushed to him, throwing down her rifle. She quickly checked his pulse. It was weak, but it was there. He was alive. She glanced at the box he was still clutching in his hands. Salvation. It was here. But at that moment, she realized that now they were twice as trapped. Igor was unconscious. She was alone. And somewhere out there in the forest, her father was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with the bandits. And the guard at the gate hadn't gone anywhere. She dragged Igor into the room and laid him down on the sofa as best she could. Then she grabbed the box and the syringe and rushed into the porch. Her hands moved quickly and precisely. She measured out the right dose, found a vein in the mare's neck, and gave her the injection. Everything was just as she had been taught. Now all she could do was wait. And pray. She sat on the floor next to Zarya, stroking her, whispering something, while listening to the sounds outside. The rumble of the car that had driven away did not return. The guard at the gate stood motionless. What did this mean? Had they given up the chase? Or, on the contrary, had they surrounded the forest and were now waiting for dawn to comb it thoroughly? And what had become of her father? These thoughts made her head spin. About an hour passed. Suddenly, Anna noticed a change. Zari's breathing became deeper and more even. The convulsive tremors that had been shaking her body periodically stopped. Anna put her ear to her chest again. Her heart was beating faster, more rhythmically. The medicine was working. A timid, fragile hope flickered in her soul. The mare slowly turned her head and looked at her. And in her large, intelligent eyes, there was no more agony. There was fatigue and gratitude. Anna smiled through her tears. At that moment, she forgot everything. The bandits, the danger, her past. She was just a veterinarian who had saved her patient. And that was the most important thing. The joy was as fragile as the first ice on a puddle. Anna understood that. The medicine had given them time, a respite, but not victory. The threat was still there. The guard at the gate still stood like a dark statue, and in the forest, her father was alone against a whole pack. She picked up the rifle again. Now she had to protect not only the horses, but also the weakened Igor. She dragged him from the sofa to the floor, away from the windows, and covered him with a blanket. Then she took up a position in the dark corridor, from where she could see both the front door and the entrance to the porch. Time dragged on like thick tar. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made her shudder. She thought of her father. He was strong and experienced, but he was not young. And against him were young, desperate, and most likely armed men. The thought was unbearable. At the same time, in the administration office on the other side of the village head, Semyon Petrovich, was pacing nervously. He rubbed his sweaty hands together. Fear fought with his wounded pride. Some bandits in his village, shooting, fighting. It disrupted his entire familiar, sleepy way of life. And most importantly, it was a responsibility that he was terrified of. He picked up the old telephone several times, but there was no connection. But then, around 3 a.m, after another attempt, he suddenly heard the saving, intermittent beeps in the receiver. The line was back. Without a second thought, he dialed the number of the local police station. Stammering and stumbling over his words, he told the sleepy officer everything he knew. About the strange horses, about the beaten stranger at the Vetrov's house, about the gunshots, which hadn't actually happened, but Semyon decided to embellish for the sake of credibility, and about the black SUVs. The officer on duty didn't believe him at first, but when he mentioned the thoroughbred horses, he suddenly became serious. Stay where you are. Don't go anywhere. A patrol will be sent as soon as it can get through. The road is bad where you are. While Semyon was reporting to the authorities, the guard at the gate of the Vetrov's house received an order over the radio. The voice on the loudspeaker was angry and sharp. They let the old man get away. He's leading them through the swamps like puppies. We're going back. Be ready. There's no time. We're storming the house. The guard turned off his radio and took his pistol from his belt. He slowly moved toward the house. He was no longer hiding. He walked to the porch, confident that only a frightened woman was inside. But he didn't know that a pair of cold, watchful eyes were watching him from the darkness of the forest, from the ravine. Sergei Ivanovich had returned. He hadn't led the bandits far. He had only made a large detour, covered his tracks, and, like a shadow, returned to his house, circling it from the side where no one was expecting him. He saw the bandit go to the door. He saw the gun in his hand. The gamekeeper acted silently. He slipped out from behind the corner of the barn when the guard was level with him. A short, precise blow with the butt of his rifle to the back of the head. The bandit only gave a muffled groan and slumped like a sack into the snowdrift. Sergei Ivanovich dragged him behind the barn, quickly tied him up with a rope he always carried with him, and stuffed a gag made from his own cap into his mouth. He crept up to the door and knocked quietly with the agreed signal. 3 times. A pause, then 2 more. Anna started. It was their old signal from when she was a child. She rushed to the door and pushed the bolt back. "Dad," she whispered, letting him in. "You're alive, and you're unharmed. Well done," he said, seeing the rifle in her hands. "Did you deliver the medicine?" "Yes." "To Kolya." "She's better," she replied quickly. "Igor is here. He's unconscious." "I know. The others will be back soon. They're angry as hell. They'll break in. We have to hold out." They worked quickly and efficiently, without saying a word. They barricaded the door with an old oak table. They checked all the windows. Sergei Ivanovich took a box of hunting cartridges from a hiding place in the basement. "We'll only shoot as a last resort. Aim for the legs first. We don't need any dead bodies." He spoke calmly and businesslike, and his calmness rubbed off on Anna. She was no longer afraid. She was with her father. They were in their home, and they would defend it. They were right. 20 minutes later, 2 jeeps pulled up to the gate. 4 men jumped out. They saw that their sentry was gone and understood everything. "They're in the house. They're all there," someone shouted furiously. They didn't bother knocking. One of them, the largest, ran up and rammed the door with his shoulder. The door creaked but held, propped up by the barricade. "Break it down," commanded the leader. The second bandit brought a small sledgehammer from the car. Blows rang out across the house, echoing in every floorboard. Anna stood with her rifle pointed at the door. Sergei Ivanovich stood at the window, watching the yard. "They're going to break it down," he said. "Anya, as soon as they get through, shoot at their feet, just to stop them." But just as the door cracked under another blow and gave way, far away, at the entrance to the village, a piercing siren wailed. First one, then a second joined it. The sound grew closer, echoing off the snow-covered forest. The bandits froze. Their faces were contorted with rage and confusion. They were trapped. "Let's go, through the forest," shouted the leader. But it was too late. 2 police Ural trucks drove into the yard, blinding everyone with their headlights. Armed riot police poured out of them. "Stop! Police! Drop your weapons!" The outcome was quick and chaotic. The bandits were arrested without a single shot fired. The house smelled of strangers, tobacco, and gunpowder. Igor came to his senses. Seeing the police, he did not resist. He sat down on the sofa and began to tell everything from the beginning. About the theft, the chase, his dead friend Dima, how Sergei Ivanovich and Anna saved him and the horses. He spoke calmly, without emotion, like a man who had long accepted his fate. Anna stood nearby. She listened to him and, for the first time in many years, felt no hatred. Only a dull, aching pain and a strange, bitter sympathy. As he was being led away, he turned and looked into her eyes. "Forgive me, Anya," he said. She did not answer. She just nodded silently. Several months passed. The harsh winter receded, giving way to a lush green spring. The Sukonka River had long since freed itself from the ice and now flowed peacefully. A beautiful bay mare named Zarya grazed on the sun-drenched meadow near the Vetrov's house. Next to her, already noticeably grown and stronger, a foal was frolicking. Anna, dressed not in her postal uniform but in comfortable work clothes, was vaccinating a neighbor's calf. Her movements were confident and calm. It wasn't just her skills that had returned to her. Her life had returned to her. Her fear of the river and horses had disappeared, melting away like the last snow of winter. She had saved not only the 2 frozen animals that had wandered into her house on a stormy night. That night, protecting her home and fighting for the lives of others, she had saved herself. She looked at Zarya, who approached her and trustingly nudged her palm with her soft lips. Anna smiled. It was the first truly happy, bright smile she had smiled in the last 5 years. A new life lay ahead of her, and she was ready for it. Igor's story sparked a lot of debate, dividing people into two camps. Who did the right thing in the end? Igor, who turned himself into the police and got a prison sentence? Or should he have tried to escape and start a new life? Write your opinion in the comments.